Hello and welcome to today's lesson. Today we are looking at approximating with money. So very often when you're making a purchase, you don't have a calculator with you, obviously. So what we do is we try to do an approximation so you can guess at how much it's going to be when you get to the till when you got to pay. So today's goal, I want you to be able to use rounding skills, and that rounding skills, it comes from a skill from our Unit 1. All right. So with Unit 1, so rounding skills, that's from our Unit 1. I want you to use those rounding skills to help approximate the amount of the purchase, and also I want you to be able to approximate sales tax. All right. And so we're looking at doing both skills here. So strategies for approximating money. So one of the first skills that we do here, I guess, skill number 1, is what we do is we round to the nearest 50 cents. So we're going to round to the nearest 50 cents, because when we go through and round to the nearest 50 cents, it makes it a little bit easier to keep track of how much we're actually accumulating. And then the second skill I want to talk about is the 10% rule, and that involves dealing with taxes. Okay, so some examples with the 10% rule. So what is 10% of the following? So what I'm going to do is we're just going to talk about the shortcut here. So the first one here, we'll call it A. 10% rule, what it does is it allows us to make an easy approximation. So if I had, and let's start with, let's start off with an easy amount. Let's start off with $100. So what is 10% of $100? Well, remember, I'll show the long steps here. To get 10%, you would convert your 10% to a decimal. That's your first job that you would do. So 10%, so this is from the earlier lesson, is equal to 0.1, and we do that by dividing by 100. And then you would take that decimal amount and multiply by the number in question, and 0.1 times 100 turns out to be 10. So 10% of 100 is $10. So what's really happening here is that we're moving the decimal, whatever the dollar amount is, we're moving at one spot. Okay, so a couple of other examples here for that 10% rule. So what happens if I had $450? What's 10% of that? Well, same strategy as before. 10% just means that we're moving the decimal over one spot. And if that's the case, then 450, 10% would be $45. All right. And one last example. What happens if I had $3,800? What's 10%? Well, moving the decimal over, you would end up with 380. And this is going to work for, we're going to apply it even with numbers that have decimals. So let's talk about if I had $525.30. So what's 10% of that? We're still moving that decimal over one spot. And it's an approximation. So all we're really going to do is I'm going to move it over. So I'm going to call it $52. And 50 cents. You can call it 53, but what's the difference? You want to do it to something that's easy to round to. So one last example then. What happens to you if you have $31.65? Well, move the decimal place over 1. So I would have 3, and then 165. Let's just call that $3.20. All right. So we're just rounding to make it to something that's easy to work with. So here's some examples, and we can round to the nearest dollar. All right. So I'm going to do a little bit of both here. So we can round to the nearest 50 cents, and we can also round to the nearest dollar. All right. So we're going to do a bit of both, so you get to see both in action. And we're going to flip-flop back and forth. So let's start with rounding to the nearest 50 cents. So as we move down, we're asking ourselves each time, 79, is that closer to 50, or is that closer to rounding up to $2? So remember, 75 cents would be the cutoff here. So maybe I'll put up here, so as a reminder, that our dividers are 25 and 75. So $1.79 is closer to the $2. Okay, so this would round up to $2. The 341, 41 cents, that is closer to $3.50 because it's above that 25-cent mark we talked about. 8.29, that's equal to, or would round to 8.50. The 3.69, so the milk, it would round back to 3.50 because it's less than 75 cents. The 2.39, 39 is closer to 50, so that would become $2.50. And $1.69, that would go to $1.50. And 5.19, that's closer to just straight $5. So what I'm doing is I'm taking all these value or dollar amounts and I'm calculating it to something that is close to a half dollar, 50 cents. Okay? Because what that allows me to do, I can now go through and I can add the total here in my head. So if we go down here using just regular adding skills, so we'd have $2, add 2 to that, that's $5.50. $5.50 and $56, and 6 plus 8, and you use your fingers here. Okay, the 6 plus 8, that gives you 14, 15, 16, 17, 50, 18, 19, 20, 21, 21.50, 26.50, 27, 27, and 6 gives us $33. Oops, $33. So that's approximately what it's going to be. Now we can round to the nearest dollar. If we're around to the nearest dollar, that means that it's the 50-cent value that is the tilting point. So $1.79. The chips, we would round to $2. $3.41, that's going to round back to $3. $8.29, it's less than 50 cents, so it's going to go to $8. So now we don't even have to worry about the half dollar or the 50 cents. So $3.69, that's going to go to $4. The $2.39, it's going to go back to $2. $1.69 will round up to $2. And the $5.19 be $5. And finally, $6.49, that would go back to $6. Now if we add that up, 2 plus 3 is 5. Plus 8 is 13, plus 4 is 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 21 and 5 is 26, and then add a 6, that would get us to $32. So there's the approximation. Now I'm going to pause it for a second. I'm going to calculate the actual value for you so you can see how close the approximation is. So I just rang it up in the calculator, and I found that the total here The exact total was $32.94. So if you look at our approximations, we approximated using to the half dollar that it was going to be $33. Going to the nearest dollar was $32, and we actually calculated out it's just under $33. So rounding to the nearest 50 cent or the nearest dollar gets you a fairly accurate calculation. Okay, so you can see how close it actually comes out. And that's what we're going to be practicing in our skill sets here. So we're going back to this arena menu that we had in an earlier lesson. And this time we're going to round and we're going to do the calculations accordingly. So first question, if Tony buys a hot dog, so there's our hot dog, and then a Coke and fries. So there's our Coke and our fries. How much will it cost? Well, Tony's going to use rounding, and let's go to the nearest 50 cents because it's we're dealing with a smaller amount. So hot dog, Coke, fries. So the hot dog, that's going to be $2. The Coke, $1.25. So you can round it up or down here, but I would rounding up's better because it always makes the worst case scenario. And then the fries are $1.95. So there we go. So when we add those up, I know that I have 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's going to be about $5.50. So $5.50. And our actual value, if I pause it for 1 sec, and if I calculate the actual value, so you're not going to do this, you're just doing an approximation, but I just want to show you how close the actual is $5.30. So a little bit of an overestimate, but it's pretty darn close. So if Taylor buys her pizza and milk, we go to the nearest 50 cents again. So $2.75. It's on the edge, but I round up, and then the milk is 85 cents, round up. So she knows she needs to have about $4 if she wants to actually buy all that food. And finally, JC buys a hamburger, candy, and Coke. So a hamburger, a candy, and a Coke. So again, his hamburger is $3.50, so we leave it. It's already at a 50-cent marker. The candy's $1.75. Again, I always round up to be safe. And his Coke's $1.25. In this case, you can round up or down, but I'm going to round up still because it gives me worst case scenario. So if I add those up, I have 2.50 cents. So it's going to make either a 50 cent or a dollar. So here it's $1. And then plus 3 is $4, 5, 6, $7. So I would estimate his meal would be about $7. And if he gives $10, then you have to calculate the change. Well, now, because it rounds, he can expect about $3 and change. All right. So with estimating, it allows us to kind of approximate what the value will be. So I'm going to finish. I got one more slide to finish up in the next video, and then we can work through some of the work or the homework.